Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, July 30th. Today is day 298 since October 7th. Lord, have mercy, Christ, have mercy. In the middle of the day today, I got a notice on our project management system from a staff member that said there was a huge explosion in Beirut, that reports indicated that there had been an Israeli airstrike. One of our staff members, a former Foreign Service officer, summarized the situation and said that Harat Harik, part of the Dahia southern Beirut suburb, largely populated by Shia Muslims and the home of the Hezbollah offices, was where the explosion had taken place. News reports said that it was a targeted assassination of Hezbollah's chief technologist on missiles, Fuad Shukr. Shukr has a long history. Apparently, he was involved in the bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks decades ago. And if there was a question of if this strike would count as sufficient revenge for on Israel's behalf in response to the Hezbollah missile that had killed the numerous Druze youth over the weekend. And the staff member said that things might get a little less dangerous today than they were yesterday, but probably not. Shukr is considered the number 2 in Hezbollah, according to Israeli news, and it's in charge of the organization's military activities. The Israeli Defense Forces said that it had struck a senior Hezbollah commander responsible for launching the rocket attacks on Majd al-Shams, the area in the Golan Heights, which is Israeli controlled. The New York Times said something similar. They said that there were Israeli strikes in a Beirut suburb targeting a Hezbollah commander. Israel said that it had targeted the commander who was blamed for the assault over the weekend that killed 12 children and teenagers in the Golan Heights. And today's attack fueled fears that the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah could escalate into an all-out war. Lebanese sources indicated 3 people were killed in the bombing and 74 people were wounded. A 30-year-old Israeli man from a kibbutz in northern Israel was killed today by shrapnel following a barrage of 10 rockets from Lebanon, most of which were intercepted, according to the IDF. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said he does not believe that a fight between Israel and Hezbollah is inevitable, and Washington would like to see things resolved in a diplomatic fashion. Hezbollah has rejected calls from international envoys to avoid responding to this Israeli attack in retaliation, for the attack on Majd al-Shams, according to reporters. And, one wonders how this might escalate overnight in this regard. So please be in prayer, just that things would not continue to worsen. The UK Foreign Secretary called on British nationals to depart from Lebanon now while commercial flights are running, that the UK cannot guarantee they would be able to evacuate their citizens if the situation worsens. In Israel, there were increased conversations and debate today amongst the government officials about the riots between the Israeli police and military. President Herzog said an immediate and in-depth investigation is required. This is specifically in response to the alleged abuse of the Palestinian detainee from Gaza at the Teiman detention facility. I went into great detail about this yesterday in the daily update. He was arrested in Gaza during the war. Defense Minister Golan urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to examine whether National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was involved in delaying the police's response to far-right riots that happened at these Israeli Defense Force bases. The riots happened on Monday. The rioters were protesting the detention of Army reservists. And so these Army reservists were far-right members of the Israeli Army. They were accused of abusing this Palestinian detainee from Gaza. Gallant further called on the Prime Minister to take a firm stand against coalition members who participated in the riots. So senior police officers criticized the police's conduct during the riots. It's sad to say, but the mood in the police is clear. Ben-Gvir did not have to say a word, a senior police officer reported to Haaretz. A police source admitted that some of the rioters at the Teiman detention center were identified in real time, that they're known to the police because they've been involved in far-right rallies. The police said they have no plans to arrest the rioters at this time. The IDF actually set up a roadblock leading to one of the bases and erected fences at the entrance to this military court where rioters breached the site the night before. Dozens of border police officers and soldiers have been deployed within the base to bolster security. So just to give you an idea of what's happening, these are reservists that were held in detention, and some of the people that are coming and rioting are either reservists or, they're part of the security establishment. And so this is really, really scary. And there have been conversations in Israel about how this is unacceptable. that this is happening. In terms of ceasefire hostage negotiations, sources from the IDF said that they believe some of the bodies of Israeli hostages held by Hamas will never be found. This happened previously with the missing Israeli airman Ron Arad. In response to Hamas's claim that it was procrastinating in negotiations by adding new demands, Netanyahu's office said Israel did not add any conditions to the outline, but it was Hamas who demanded 29 amendments and did not agree to the original outline. But contrary to what the Prime Minister's office statement said, sources familiar with the negotiations said that Israel did define or redefine its demands, and that in fact, there were a number of issues that were not a part of the negotiations that had been added. And according to Israeli sources, Hamas did add 29 changes to the original outline, but since has dropped most of them. In Gaza, according to Israeli sources, Israeli forces killed over 150 militants during a week-long operation in Khan Yunis. According to the IDF, the troops said they destroyed tunnels, weapon depots, terror infrastructure, and other military equipment. Al Jazeera issued a report about that same time frame and said 300 people were killed. Hundreds of others were wounded or missing in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis over a 9-day ground assault by Israel's military, according to defense agencies. So I just would look at those two reports side by side and see how they contradict one another. I think that's really, really important to do. Rescue services in Khan Yunis reported that teams, this is actually from Haaretz, an Israeli news source, said 37 bodies were found under the rubble of buildings in neighborhoods where the IDF operated. So when we talk about the death toll not including 10,000 people found under the rubble, this is what it's talking about. Residents of these neighborhoods began returning to their homes on Tuesday morning following the departure of Israeli forces. Al Jazeera reported that a dozen Palestinians had been killed in an Israeli military attack today, targeting the entrance of the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. UK updates, Britain, I had mentioned, was thinking about halting arms exports to Israel. It has decided to postpone that decision for several weeks, according to the Times, while the Foreign Office examines possible evidence of war crimes. I wanted to give just a quick update on the International Court of Justice's July 19th advisory opinion rendered on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel as it related to the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. This is really, really critical, and we have not talked about it a lot. The court determined that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful. It must be brought to an end as rapidly as possible. Israel must cease all settlement activity and evacuate settlers from the occupied territory. It must take and make full reparation for the damage caused to all natural or legal persons concerned in the OPT, and that legal consequences follow for third states, the United Nations, and other international organizations. This is talking about how states that are complicit must also be held accountable. The International Humanitarian Law Center just published a new publication that provides a summary of this advisory opinion, and I want to point you to it, that explains the reasoning for these decisions, that how they came to these conclusions. The note examines the points raised in these 7 declarations that were made by judges of the panel, as well as in 2 joint opinions and 5 separate opinions that they provide. All materials are available. We have the links. It's an excellent resource. And so I wanted to point you to that. IDA, the Association of International Development Associations, of which CMEP is a member, called that to our attention. On other Middle East issues, CMEP works very closely on the issue of Armenia, the oldest Christian country in the world, where the Christian community is significantly under threat from the time of the Armenian and Orthodox genocide that began in the late 19th century. And in many ways, that ethnic cleansing has continued today. Today, the Armenian National Committee of America gave the Biden administration a failing grade for arming, abetting, and emboldening Azerbaijan's 2023 genocide of Artsak's indigenous Armenians, refusing to hold the Aliyev's regime accountable for its crimes, undertaking no meaningful steps to secure the return of Artsakh Armenians or the release of hostages, and providing only minimal assistance to the at-risk Artsakh refugees. I just want you to know Artsakh is the historic Armenian name for the territory that's also known as Nagorno-Karabakh. And we talk about that a lot at CMEP. I received an award for our work with Armenia. And I often compare it to the displacement of the Palestinian people. There is a lot that is parallel. We've been talking about how the Armenian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, 25% of that old city of Jerusalem, that quarter, The Armenian quarter is under threat of being taken over today by settlers in the Old City. And the last comment for today is we put out a press release. We joined 20 international humanitarian aid and advocacy organizations issuing a snapshot report of where things in Gaza stand after almost 300 days of war, attacks on humanitarian zones, and the never-ending relocation orders and aid workers' fatalities that have crippled aid delivery. The statement was issued from Ramallah on today, July 30th. It talks about the intensified airstrikes where aid organizations are providing services, that these strikes happen in humanitarian zones. They've resulted in mass civilian deaths. They have shrunk the space to deliver life-saving assistance. And so I wanted to call your attention to that report that will be on our press release page and our statement page tomorrow. May no people ever experience genocide, displacement, ethnic cleansing, violence, and war, be it in Armenia, in Gaza, any place in the world. There's so much work for us to do to advocate for peace and an end to all violence. May God go before us. Amen.